January 16, 1945. Ardennes Forest, Belgium. The snow fell in thick sheets. German Panzer Grenadiers crouched behind frozen earth, watching the tree line. They'd seen American Jeeps before, hundreds of them. Thin-skinned scout vehicles, messengers on wheels, nothing to fear. Then they heard the whistling. Not artillery, something else. Two American Jeeps burst from the forest, engines screaming. But these weren't scouts. Mounted where the passenger seat should be, twin bazookas, angled skyward like the fangs of some mechanical predator. The German commander raised his binoculars. 4 rockets launched simultaneously, then 4 more. The Jeeps pivoted, fired again, and vanished into the smoke before the first shells even landed. When the dust cleared, 3 German positions had been obliterated. The Panzer Grenadiers exchanged glances. This wasn't in the manual. This wasn't supposed to be possible. The Americans had turned a messenger into a weapon, and this was only the beginning. The underestimated machine. Let's rewind. The world was burning. German panzers had crushed Poland in weeks. France fell in a month. The Blitzkrieg wasn't just a tactic, it was a revolution in mechanized warfare. While Europe's army still relied on horses, Germany rolled forward on steel treads and rubber tires. America watched from across the Atlantic, and America panicked. The U.S. Army was horse-drawn, literally. In 1940, most American units still used horses and wagons for transport. The Quartermaster Corps knew they were a decade behind. So they issued a challenge. Build us a lightweight reconnaissance vehicle. 4-wheel drive, capable of crossing any terrain, crew of 3, room for a machine gun. And do it in 49 days. 135 companies received the proposal. Only 3 responded: American Bantam, Willys Overland, and Ford. What emerged from those factories would become the most recognizable military vehicle in human history. The Jeep wasn't elegant, it wasn't powerful, it was a rectangular box on wheels with an 80-inch wheelbase and a 60-horsepower engine. But it was something else, something nobody anticipated. It was adaptable. The canvas. Here's what the specifications said: cargo truck, personnel carrier, ambulance. Here's what soldiers made it: everything. The Jeep patent, filed in October 1941, described it as a convertible small car body so arranged that a single vehicle may be interchangeably used as a cargo truck, personnel carrier, emergency ambulance, field beds, radio car, trench mortar unit, mobile anti-aircraft machine gun unit, or for other purposes. Trench mortar unit. That line would prove prophetic. By 1941, production had begun. Willys built the MB, Ford built the GPW. They were identical except for the grille. Ford's had 9 slots, Willys had 7. Over 640,000 rolled off assembly lines by war's end. The Jeep weighed 2,160 pounds. It could carry 800 pounds of cargo or 5 soldiers. It topped out at 45 miles per hour. Ground clearance, 6.25 inches. Fuel capacity, enough for 300 miles. On paper, it was unremarkable. On the battlefield, it was a blank canvas. Soldiers began modifying them immediately. They welded armor plates to the front. They mounted Browning 1919.30 caliber machine guns on pedestals. They added M2.50 caliber heavy machine guns. They stretched the frame to carry stretchers. They added radios. They rigged up flamethrowers. And then someone had a different idea. What if we mounted something heavier? Sicily, July 1943. The 2nd Chemical Mortar Battalion landed at Gela alongside Derby's Rangers. They carried M2 4.2-inch mortars, massive tubes that fired high explosive shells up to 3,200 yards. These weapons provided crucial fire support, but they had one problem. They were stationary. Set up the base plate, adjust the bipod, calculate the trajectory, fire. Then, when enemy artillery found your position, break it down and move fast. But what if you didn't have to? Soldiers in New Caledonia had already experimented with mounting 60mm mortars in Jeeps. The M2 mortar, a French design licensed by the U.S., was lighter, portable. Normally carried by 3-man teams, it could fire 18 rounds per minute with a maximum range of 2,000 yards. The baseplate fit on the passenger floor. the tube mounted between the seats. Ammunition crates ran along the rear fenders, 60 rounds ready to fire. Now, the mortar was mobile. Drive into range, fire, drive out before counterfire arrived. The concept spread. Reconnaissance platoons added 60mm mortars to their scout jeeps. The 2nd Armored Division assigned 1 mortar jeep to every M8 Greyhound armored car. When the Greyhound drew fire, the jeep would lay down smoke or covering fire, allowing the bigger vehicle to retreat. But the 60mm was just the beginning.
The Bazooka Revolution. Enter the M1 bazooka. Officially designated the M1A1 rocket launcher, it was America's answer to German tanks. A 60mm tube that fired shape-charged rockets. Infantry could carry it. Infantry could kill armor with it. Except it wasn't quite enough. The early M1 and M1A1 struggled against late-war German armor. Panthers, Tigers. Their sloped armor deflected the rockets. The battery-powered firing mechanism failed in cold weather. So, soldiers improvised. Battle of the Bulge, December 1944. The 82nd Airborne developed standardized armor kits for their reconnaissance jeeps, welded steel plates covering the front and sides. Then they added something else, twin bazookas mounted on the machine gun pedestal. 2 rockets, 1 trigger pull. The 9th Infantry Division's 60th Regiment took it further. Their reconnaissance platoon rigged up quad bazooka mounts. 4 tubes, 4 rockets. Devastating suppressive fire. Period photographs showed jeeps bristling with these improvised weapons. Some had twin mounts, others had 4. They looked absurd, like something from a comic book, but they worked. Drive within range, fire everything, retreat before the enemy could respond. The Germans called them Geisterwagen, ghost cars. They appeared, unleashed hell, and vanished. The German reaction. Wehrmacht officers couldn't believe it. They had their own light vehicle, the Kübelwagen. Ferdinand Porsche designed it, based on the Volkswagen Beetle. It was good, reliable, easy to maintain. But it was a car. It carried 4 troops and maybe an MG-42 machine gun. The Jeep was doing things cars shouldn't do. After the war, U.S. Army historian Hugh Cole interviewed captured Wehrmacht generals. They told him the same thing. The Jeep impressed them more than anything else in the American arsenal, more than the Sherman tank, more than the P-51 Mustang. Why? Because it was everywhere, and it did everything. German soldiers encountered Jeeps pulling 37mm anti-tank guns, Jeeps mounting quad .5 caliber machine guns for anti-aircraft defense, Jeeps with recoilless rifles, Jeeps carrying forward artillery observers, Jeeps laying telephone cables, Jeeps serving as ambulances. And when they captured Jeeps, which they desperately tried to do, they found something disturbing. These vehicles were designed for modification. Radio mounts built into the frame, machine gun pedestals, modular weapon systems. The Allies had created a platform, not just a vehicle. One Belgian sentry identified German infiltrators during the Battle of the Bulge by watching how they used a captured Jeep. American colonels always drove. They never sat in the back. The front seat had more legroom. But the Germans, used to their own protocols, put the colonel in the rear. Small detail, fatal mistake. Recoilless rifles, the final evolution. March 1945, Operation Varsity. The Aaron 155th Airborne Anti-Aircraft Artillery Battalion, 17th Airborne Division received something new. 2 75mm M20 recoilless rifles. These weren't bazookas. They were genuine anti-tank guns, light enough to be shoulder-fired or tripod-mounted. But someone had a better idea. Mount them on Jeeps. The M20 fired a 75mm shaped charge round. It could penetrate armor, destroy bunkers, suppress enemy positions. And unlike conventional artillery, the recoilless design meant no massive recoil to knock the Jeep off balance. The Germans had invented recoilless rifles, the 7.5-centimeter Leichtgeschütz 40, for their paratroopers, but they used them from static positions. The Americans put them on wheels. Operation Varsity Jeeps dropped from gliders with 75mm rifles already mounted. They rolled off the landing zones and immediately engaged German positions. The shock value was immense. German defenders reported vehicles that fought like tanks, but moved like scouts. By the time they repositioned anti-tank guns to engage, the Jeeps were gone. Eisenhower later said the Jeep was one of the 4 pieces of equipment most vital to Allied victory. Marshall called it America's greatest contribution to modern warfare. But the real contribution wasn't the vehicle itself. It was the philosophy behind it.
The philosophy of adaptation. The German military valued precision, standardization. Every vehicle had a designated role. Every tactic followed doctrine. The American military valued improvisation, adaptation. If something worked, use it. If it could work better, modify it. The Jeep embodied this philosophy. Soldiers in North Africa mounted Vickers K machine guns and jerry cans for desert raids. British SAS and long-range desert group units turned Jeeps into mobile gun platforms, striking Rommel's supply lines. In the Pacific, Marines fitted Jeeps with extra cooling for jungle terrain. They used them to haul supplies through swamps where trucks couldn't go. In Italy, Jeeps climbed mountain trails and forded rivers. They became ambulances evacuating wounded from impossible terrain. In France, after D-Day, soldiers welded wire cutters to Jeep frames. German defenders had strung cables across roads to decapitate Jeep occupants. The wire cutters, curved bars mounted on the hood, cut through the cables first. Every theater, every challenge, a new modification. The Germans couldn't match this, not because they lacked engineering skill. German engineering was excellent, but because their military culture didn't encourage it. When Wehrmacht units captured Jeeps, they used them as is. They didn't modify them. They didn't experiment. They followed the manual. The Americans wrote the manual as they went. The legacy. By 1945, Jeeps were everywhere. Soviet forces used 77,000 American Jeeps on the Eastern Front. Stalin personally requested 5,000 in a meeting with Avril Harriman in 1941. His eyes lit up at the mention. This is a war of motors. The side having the largest number of motors is bound to win, he said. The British received thousands, the Free French, the Poles, the Chinese, every Allied nation. German soldiers so desperately wanted captured Jeeps that special intelligence units were formed to study them. They published English-language manuals to help maintain captured vehicles. Some German units painted captured Jeeps with Wehrmacht markings. Others kept them as is and used them for reconnaissance, gambling that the silhouette would confuse Allied forces long enough to escape. The Jeep became the most widely used military vehicle in history. Over 50 nations adopted it. After the war, manufacturers worldwide built copies. The Soviet Gaz-69, the British Land Rover, the Japanese Type 73. But none matched the original's versatility. The mortar that couldn't be. Let's return to that phrase from the patent, trench mortar unit. The Jeep was designed to carry mortars, but soldiers made it fire them. The 60mm mortar mounted in Jeeps could drop high-explosive shells on enemy positions from 2,000 yards away. The crew could fire, relocate, and fire again before German artillery calculated their position. Chemical mortar battalions used Jeeps to transport their heavier 4.2-inch mortars. While these couldn't fire from the Jeep itself, the mobility changed everything. They could redeploy in minutes instead of hours. One battalion commander called the chemical mortar the most effective single weapon used in support of infantry. But the weapon was only as effective as its mobility. The Jeep provided that. The twin bazooka Jeeps of the 82nd and 9th Infantry Division took it further. They created a mobile anti-tank platform from a scout vehicle. German tankers reported encounters with rocket Jeeps that appeared, fired, and vanished before they could return fire.
This wasn't in anyone's doctrine. This was pure battlefield innovation, and it terrified the enemy. The numbers behind the legend. Let's talk scale. 640,000 Jeeps built during World War II. That's 360,000 from Willys, 280,000 from Ford. They cost $738.74 each, less than a machine gun, less than a week's ammunition for a single artillery battery. Every U.S. Army infantry regiment received 149 Jeeps. Glider regiments got 24. Parachute regiments got 17. The Jeep could ford 18 inches of water, climb a 60% grade, operate in temperatures from minus 65 degrees F to 125 degrees F. It got 20 miles per gallon fully loaded. The fuel tank held 15 gallons, enough for 300 miles between refills. The engine produced 60 horsepower at 4,000 RPM. Maximum speed 65 miles per hour on flat road, though the Army recommended 45. But the most important number? 0. 0 days of training needed to drive one. 0 specialized tools required for field repairs. 0 restrictions on modifications. The Germans produced 50,000 Kübelwagons during the war. Good vehicles. Reliable. But they never became platforms for innovation. They remained cars. The Jeep became something else entirely. The shock of simplicity. Here's what confused the Germans most. The Jeep wasn't sophisticated. Wehrmacht engineers studied captured examples. They found stamped steel components, simple leaf springs, a basic 4-cylinder engine, no advanced technology, no secret weapons. But they missed the point. The sophistication wasn't in the engineering. It was in the concept. American military philosophy, inherited from frontier traditions, valued resourcefulness over rigidity. Soldiers were encouraged to adapt, to improvise, to make do with what they had. The Jeep was designed for this. Mounting points for weapons, modular components, simple mechanics that anyone could repair with basic tools. German soldiers, even when they captured Jeeps, often used them wrong. They treated them like Kübelwagons, transport for officers, maybe a light machine gun mount. They didn't strap mortars to them, they didn't rig up quad bazooka launchers, they didn't weld armor plates and charge enemy positions. Because their doctrine didn't allow it. The Americans did it anyway.
Aschaffenburg. Let's return to where we started, but earlier. March 1945. The city of Aschaffenburg, Germany. The 157th Infantry Regiment, 45th Division, approached the city. German defenders had fortified it. Every building, every street corner. Behind the infantry, Company C, 2nd Chemical Mortar Battalion, M2 4.2-inch mortars. Not mounted on Jeeps, these were too heavy for that, but transported by them. The mortars could redeploy constantly. German counterfire never found them. They'd fire, load up, move, fire again. Over 14,000 rounds in the first 2 weeks of the Salerno campaign. At Anzio, chemical mortar battalions provided the only indirect fire support Rangers could rely on. The Germans called the 4.2-inch mortar Vierfach-Granate, the fourfold grenade, because the shells seemed to come from everywhere at once. The mobility the Jeep provided turned a weapon system into a persistent threat. The Germans could never locate the mortar positions because the positions kept moving. That's what shocked them, not the weapons themselves, the mobility, the adaptability, the refusal to fight by the rules. After the war, the Jeep didn't stop at VE Day, Korea, Vietnam, Middle East conflicts, Africa, South America. Wherever American forces deployed, Jeeps followed. The M38 replaced the MB in 1949, the M38A1 came in 1952, the M151 in 1960, but the philosophy remained simple, adaptable, modifiable. Until 1981 when the Humvee arrived, bigger, more powerful, more specialized, but less adaptable. The Humvee is a superb vehicle, but you can't lift it out of mud with handles. You can't field modify it with a welding torch and spare parts. You can't drop it from a glider and have it fighting in minutes. The Jeep could. Civilian versions of the Jeep, the CJ series, the Wrangler, preserve that spirit. They're still modular, still simple enough to repair in a driveway, still designed for people who refuse to accept limitations. That's the legacy. The German perspective. When Wehrmacht generals were interviewed after the war, they were asked what surprised them most about American forces. Not the industrial capacity, they expected that. Not the air power, they'd faced the RAF. Not even the M1 Garand or the Sherman tank. It was the Jeep. One general said, "Your Jeep could do everything our vehicles could do. But your soldiers made it do things we never imagined. That was the difference." Another admitted, "We captured many Jeeps. We tried to use them like our own vehicles. It never worked the same way because we were thinking like Germans. You think like Americans." What did that mean? It meant American soldiers saw problems and solved them immediately, without waiting for orders or approval. German doctrine was brilliant, precise, effective when followed, but inflexible when circumstances changed. American doctrine was loose, improvisational, chaotic when mismanaged, but unstoppable when soldiers took initiative. The Jeep embodied that difference. A German soldier with a Kübelwagen followed his orders. An American soldier with a Jeep created new possibilities. The transformation. Think about what we've covered. A 2,160-pound vehicle, 10 feet long, 60 horsepower. It became an ambulance, a scout, a radio station, a command post, a supply truck, a cable layer, a firefighter, a snowplow. It mounted 30 caliber machine guns, 50 caliber machine guns, 37 millimeter cannons, 60 millimeter mortars, 75 millimeter recoilless rifles, twin bazookas, quad bazookas, flamethrowers. It was dropped from aircraft, towed behind gliders, driven off landing craft, parachuted in pieces, and reassembled. It operated in deserts at 125 degrees F and in Arctic conditions at minus 65 degrees F. It served in every theater of World War II, every major battle, every Allied nation. And it did all of this not because it was designed to, but because soldiers needed it to. Conclusion. The Return. January 16, 1945. Ardennes Forest. Those German Panzergrenadiers, huddled in their foxholes, didn't understand what they'd seen. A Jeep was a scout vehicle, light, vulnerable, something you tolerated because you needed reconnaissance. But the Americans had turned it into something else, a weapons platform, an artillery system, a cavalry charge on 4 wheels. The twin bazooka Jeeps that tore through the Ardennes that day were just one example. Across Europe, across the Pacific, American forces were doing the same thing with the same vehicle, taking limitations and turning them into possibilities. The German military had spent years perfecting their vehicles, the Panzer, the Kübelwagen, the Tiger tank, each one brilliantly engineered for its designated role. But they'd forgotten something fundamental. War doesn't follow roles. War follows necessity. And the Americans had built a vehicle that understood that. When those Jeeps disappeared back into the forest, trailing smoke and engine noise, the German commander knew something had changed. This wasn't about vehicles anymore. It was about thinking. The Americans didn't just have more resources, they had a different approach to warfare itself. They saw a blank canvas where others saw limitations. They saw opportunity where others saw specifications. They saw a Jeep where others saw just a car. That's what shocked the Germans. Not the weapon, not the tactic, but the philosophy behind both. The idea that a 2,160-pound truck could become whatever the moment demanded. And in that moment, in that forest, with snow falling and shells bursting, the Jeep was exactly what it needed to be. A ghost, a hammer, a revolution on 4 wheels.
That's what won the war. Not just the Jeep itself, but what it represented. The belief that no problem is unsolvable if you're willing to adapt. The conviction that rules exist to be rewritten when circumstances demand it. The understanding that simplicity, properly applied, is the most sophisticated strategy of all. The Germans learned this lesson too late. By the time they understood what the Jeep represented, the war was already over. But the lesson remains. Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't the biggest or the most advanced. It's the one that refuses to be just one thing. The Jeep was never just a truck. It was a dare, a challenge to imagination, a test of ingenuity. And in that test, American soldiers, mechanics, engineers, infantrymen, pilots, every single one of them, passed with distinction. They took a simple vehicle and made it extraordinary. Not through complexity, through creativity. That's the story. That's the shock. That's the legacy. A little rectangular box on 4 wheels that changed warfare forever. Not because of what it was, but because of what it could become.